Zuri lived in a small village where her days began before the sun rose. She worked in the yam market, scrubbing roots and cleaning mud off tarps for pennies. Her hands were rough, her back ached often, and yet she never complained. She had her grandmother to care for, an old woman who had raised her since her parents died in a village fire. Every day, Zuri carried a simple lunch, boiled cassava or maize, wrapped in banana leaves, barely enough for one person. But she had made it a habit to share it, even if it meant going hungry herself. One sweltering afternoon, as the ground cracked beneath people's feet, Zuri noticed a man slumped against a tree by the village gate. His clothes were torn, caked with mud and flies. He didn't beg, didn't speak. His eyes were half closed, like someone halfway between sleep and pain. Everyone avoided him. Mothers tugged their children away. Market women whispered, "He must be cursed," or "That's the madman who talks to ghosts." But Zuri paused. She stared at the man, then down at the food in her hands. Her stomach rumbled. She hadn't eaten since dawn, but something stronger than hunger made her step forward. She knelt in front of him and unwrapped the food. "You can have it," she said softly. The man blinked slowly. His lips trembled, then parted. "Why?" he asked, his voice dry like crumbling leaves. Zuri shrugged. "You look like you need it more than me." He took the food gently, as if it might break in his hands. He didn't eat right away. He stared at her instead, long and quiet, then nodded once. "Thank you," he whispered. "You have the heart of the river." Zuri didn't know what that meant, but something in her stirred. Zuri was known in the village as the girl who gave more than she had. At 17, she had the kind of eyes that looked older than her face, eyes that had seen fire, grief, and the silent weight of survival. Her parents had died when she was just a child, lost in a mysterious fire that swept through their family's old hut one night. Since then, her grandmother had raised her with stories, herbs, and the strength of old wisdom. But age had worn the old woman thin, and now it was Zuri who kept them both alive. Each morning, Zuri woke before the sun, walked barefoot across the damp path to the village square, and cleaned yam stalls for small coins. It was hard work. Dirt lodged deep in her fingernails, and the smell of raw root clung to her skin. Yet every day, she packed a modest lunch. Nothing extravagant, just a portion of boiled maize, and, if she was lucky, a piece of salted mango. What made her different wasn't what she packed, but what she did with it. She never ate all of it. Half was always set aside. Sometimes for a limping dog near the edge of the market. Sometimes for a child with eyes too hollow. Sometimes for no one at all, just in case someone needed it more than she did. The other vendors noticed. They mocked her generosity. "Your stomach's already flat like a leaf," one said with a snort. "Are you trying to disappear entirely?" But Zuri would just smile. Better to disappear feeding someone than be full and forget them. It was during one of these afternoons, when the sun was cruel and the village buzzed with sweat and sails, that she saw him. He sat hunched near the gate, where the road split between the hills and the market. He was barefoot, with skin darkened by layers of ash and sun. Flies danced around him. His beard was tangled, his eyes half lost beneath heavy lids. His clothes looked more like rags than garments, and his silence was so thick it seemed to repel the world. People passed him quickly. Some crossed the road entirely to avoid him. Children whispered, "That's the one who talks to trees." A woman murmured, "He smells like a grave." Another spat on the ground near him and muttered, "He's cursed." But Zuri didn't turn away. She stepped out of the stall with her lunch in her hands, walked slowly toward him, and knelt down. Without speaking, she unwrapped the maize and mango and held it out to him. The man didn't move. For a moment, it seemed like he didn't even breathe. Then, slowly, his head tilted up. Their eyes met. "You can take it," she said gently. His lips cracked open. "Why?" he asked, barely audible. "Because you're hungry." His hand trembled as he took the food. He looked at her not with desperation, but with something close to wonder. "You have the heart of the river," he said. Zuri blinked. "What?" But the man said no more. He just lowered his head and began to eat. Zuri watched him for a moment longer, then walked away, feeling something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. She didn't know what it was, or why that strange sentence stayed in her ears long after the sun went down. The days that followed were quiet, but meaningful. Every afternoon after her shift at the yam stalls, Zuri walked to the same tree near the village gate. The man was always there, silent, still, and covered in the same layers of dust and ash. He never begged, never spoke more than a soft thank you when she handed him her modest offering of food. He'd eat slowly, like he was savouring each bite, and nod in gratitude. Word began to spread. Some villagers whispered that Zuri had gone mad. "She feeds the walking shadow," said one. "Maybe she's cursed too." Others simply laughed and shook their heads. "She'll feed herself into the grave." Children dared each other to get close to the man and run away screaming. Vendors began to avoid setting up near the gate, and still Zuri went every single day. She started noticing little things, how he always sat facing the hills, as if waiting, how he sometimes muttered riddles to himself but never nonsense. There was a calmness in him, something measured, even in his silence, and though his body looked tired and worn, his posture remained strangely regal, upright, never slouched. One day, a group of boys came near while she was handing him food. They started throwing pebbles at him, laughing cruelly. "Let's see if the ghost can bleed," one shouted. Zuri stepped in front of the man and faced them. "Leave him alone," she yelled. "He's not hurting you." The boys paused, startled by her sudden fury. One muttered something under his breath and ran off, the others following. The beggar didn't speak. He simply looked at Zuri with a quiet sadness and touched the ground beside him in a small, respectful gesture. That night, after Zuri had eaten dinner with her grandmother and cleaned the dishes, she stepped outside to get water. There, resting on the threshold of their mud hut, was something small and strange, a bead bracelet. It was made of old carved wooden beads strung together with a piece of twine. The pattern was unfamiliar, but the center bead had a marking, an ancient royal symbol. Zuri had seen it only once before, in a village elder's book. She picked it up slowly, turning it over in her palm, her heart beating faster. Who would leave this, and why? She looked around, but the night was still and empty, no footsteps, no voices. Zuri sat down outside her hut, the bracelet in her hand, and felt something shift inside her, something she didn't have words for, a sense that something was unraveling. Just beyond the surface of the world, she thought she understood. She found herself thinking of the beggar's eyes, how they always searched the horizon, how they never looked away from hers. And she remembered something her father once told her, back when he was alive and still full of wisdom. "Never ignore a silent soul," he had said while carving wood under a baobab tree. "They often carry the loudest stories." That night, Zuri didn't sleep easily. The bracelet stayed under her pillow. And for the first time, she wondered, not just who the man was, but why her heart refused to turn away from him. Zuri's visits to the stranger slowly became more than just acts of kindness. They became a quiet ritual, almost sacred. She still brought him food, but now she lingered longer. At first, they sat in silence. Then, he began to speak. Not in conversation, but in strange, thoughtful phrases that felt like riddles. "Even a tree that's been cut remembers how to bloom," he said one afternoon as he chewed a roasted yam. Another day, "Water that runs deep doesn't make noise until it floods." Zuri tilted her head. You speak like an elder. I speak like someone who's listened to too many of them, he replied, with a flicker of a smile behind the dirt. She found herself drawn in by his quiet wisdom. She would bring her own questions, and he would reply with proverbs or riddles that puzzled her. But there was always meaning hidden beneath the surface, and Zuri liked the challenge. It was as if he was slowly pulling her into another world, one woven with secrets. Then one day, as a warm wind blew across the market and the air smelled of rain, he asked, "Do you know what happens when kings are buried alive?" Zuri blinked. Buried alive? What kind of question is that? He didn't smile. Some scream, some wait, but the ones who rise never forget who buried them. She laughed, half confused, half amused. Is this another story? He didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on hers, and they weren't the eyes of a beggar. That evening, something strange happened in the village. The town crier beat his drum 3 times, a signal that important news was coming. The village council gathered, and the elder spoke. A royal team is arriving. They seek someone, a prince thought to be dead. They believe he may have survived the coup that took his father's life years ago. He may be living hidden in plain sight. Gasps swept the crowd. Zuri listened from the edge of the gathering, holding her breath. It felt like a dream. She had heard whispers of the royal family's downfall when she was younger, but it had always felt like a tale from another world. But something about the timing made her uneasy. She hurried home. The next day, she brought food as usual. The man sat in his usual place. Before she could speak, he began to hum, a soft, low tune that tugged at a part of her soul she had long buried. She froze. That melody. It wasn't just a song. It was the lullaby her grandmother used to sing when she was ill. A lullaby, she said, was passed down from a queen who lost everything but her voice. Zuri felt her fingers go numb. "Where did you hear that song?" she asked. The man didn't answer. He just kept humming, eyes closed. That night, Zuri couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Her grandmother was too weak to speak much, but when Zuri hummed the tune softly to her, the old woman opened her eyes, wide and fearful. "Where did you hear that?" she whispered. Zuri didn't answer, because in her heart, she already knew. The man she had been feeding was no ordinary beggar. Zuri's daily visits didn't go unnoticed for long. People had always gossiped about her quiet nature, her strange kindness, her habit of giving away food she could barely afford. But now, the whispers turned louder, sharper. "She shares meals with shadows," a fish seller laughed. Another muttered, "Maybe she's been cursed too." You can see it in her eyes. "Watch," someone said. "Soon she'll start talking to trees like he does." It stung, but Zuri said nothing. Not because she lacked words, but because none of them were worth spending on people who didn't understand what she felt. It wasn't pity that drew her to the stranger. It was a pull, like the current of a river towards something unknown. But then, one day, he was gone. Zuri arrived at the usual spot near the gate, food in hand, but the space beneath the acacia tree was empty. She waited. An hour passed, then another. The next day, he was still missing. Zuri asked around, cautiously, so as not to attract more attention, but no one had seen him. By the second evening, panic gripped her chest. Something felt wrong. Ignoring the stares and whispers, she left the market and walked toward the riverbank beyond the village edge. It was a wild area where few dared to linger, thick reeds, soft mud, and the eerie quiet of untamed land. She searched along the path until she saw a crumpled figure lying near the water, half covered in grass and soil. Her breath caught. She ran to him. His clothes were soaked. His lips were cracked. He was trembling. sweat clinging to his skin despite the cool breeze. His eyes fluttered open when she touched his arm. "Water," he rasped. Zuri scooped water with her hands, guiding it gently to his mouth. He drank slowly, like each drop was a treasure. "Why are you here?" she asked softly. "I was followed," he whispered. "They want me gone." Zuri looked around, heart racing. "Who?" He didn't answer. Instead, he gripped her hand and said, "Sing. Please, sing something." She hesitated, then began to hum the lullaby, the one her grandmother had once sung, the one he had hummed days ago. As the melody flowed through the air, his shaking eased. His eyes closed, not in weakness, but in peace. When she stopped, he opened his eyes again and said something that froze her soul. "Don't let your kindness turn to regret. It will crown you one day." Then he slipped into sleep. Zuri stayed with him until the sky turned orange with sunset. She built a small fire and waited, her body stiff but her mind swirling. The next morning, news tore through the village like lightning. A royal guard had arrived. Dressed in deep red robes with golden buttons, he rode a stallion and carried a parchment sealed with the old royal crest. He was asking questions. "Have you seen a man with a burn scar on his shoulder? Does anyone know someone who speaks in riddles or sings old royal hymns?" People shrugged. Some lied, others whispered. But Zuri stood still, her heartbeat a loud drum in her ears. The lullaby, the bracelet, the riddles, the posture, the way he watched the hills. None of it was random. She clutched her skirt, her hands trembling. The beggar she had fed was more than a lost soul. He was someone the kingdom had buried alive, and someone who had chosen her to trust. The village square had never been so silent. It was early morning, the sun still stretching over the hills, when a figure appeared at the market gate, tall, upright, and dressed in pristine white robes. His sandals were laced high, his hair clean and braided back. A gold-trimmed sash crossed his chest, and though his face was familiar, it took the villagers several stunned moments to realize just who he was. Gasps rippled like a windstorm. That's him," someone whispered. "No, it can't be." The man stopped at the very spot where he used to sit in rags, beneath the old acacia tree. He slowly reached up and removed the cloth that once hid his face. Gone were the layers of dirt and ash. Gone was the grime that clouded his features. What remained was sharp, strong, and striking. Zuri stood frozen behind her stall, her heart caught in her throat. It was him, the beggar, the man she had fed, but now the face that stared back at them was that of Prince Amari, the lost son of the late King Jabari. The prince the kingdom had mourned, the boy who was said to have perished in the coup 10 years ago. He was very much alive, and standing among them. The silence shattered. Some villagers dropped to their knees immediately, realizing what they had done, ignored him, insulted him, mocked him. Others turned away, unable to meet his eyes. Children clung to their mothers, whispering, "That was the madman." Zuri couldn't move. Her hands trembled against the edge of the wooden stall. Prince Amari lifted his hand, not to scold or to boast, but to calm. He began to speak. "In the night of fire and betrayal, I escaped with nothing but a scar and a name. Those who should have protected the crown tried to kill it. I was forced to run, not as a prince, but as a shadow." He paused. The villagers held their breath. "For years I wandered, from city to city, village to village. I wore the clothes of the forgotten so I could see the truth of my people, not the ones who knelt before gold, but the ones who offered bread to the dusty." His eyes scanned the crowd, and then they stopped on Zuri. "She fed me," he said, his voice firm but full of emotion. "When others spat, she offered her lunch. When I had no name, she gave me dignity." Zuri's throat tightened. He walked slowly toward her. The crowd parted without a word. "And only one soul," he said, now just a few feet from her, "gave me food, not for gold, not for glory, but from love." Zuri lowered her eyes, overwhelmed. Prince Amari reached into the folds of his robe and held out something small, the bead bracelet she had found at her doorstep. It had been cleaned and restrung with golden thread. "I wanted to see who would feed a beggar with no face," he said. "Now I see. You saw the face anyway." The villagers stood in stunned silence. The air buzzed not with noise, but with revelation. The man they had mocked now stood in power, and the girl they had laughed at had fed the heart of a kingdom. The very next morning, before the village cock could crow twice, a royal carriage arrived at Zuri's doorstep. 2 guards stepped out, dressed in deep emerald with gold embroidery. One bowed and said, "The prince requests your presence at the palace." Zuri's grandmother, barely able to sit upright, reached for her hand. "Go, my child," she whispered. "Go with the same heart you've always carried." Zuri's feet felt heavy as she climbed into the carriage. Her hands trembled in her lap, and she couldn't meet the eyes of the staring villagers as the horses pulled her away. Some bowed, others simply watched with unreadable expressions. The palace gates opened to reveal a world she had never seen. Marble fountains, tiled courtyards, silk curtains blowing in the breeze. Servants in fine robes lined the walkway as Zuri was led inside. There, beneath a great golden dome, stood Amari, no longer in rags, but in full royal regalia. He greeted her not with formality, but with a gentle smile. "You shouldn't have brought me here," she said nervously, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't bring you here," he replied. "You earned this place long before I remembered mine." He offered her land, vast and fertile. She shook her head. He offered her wealth, chests filled with gold and gems. She stepped back. He offered her servants, silk and status. She held up her hand. "I want nothing for myself," Zuri said. "But if you wish to honor what I gave you, then build a place where sick elders can rest without fear, and a school where orphans can read, sing and learn that kindness is not a weakness." Amari looked at her in silence, his eyes glistening. Then he reached into his robe and held out the bracelet once again. "This," he said, "belonged to my mother, the late queen. She wore it every day until the night of the betrayal. I placed it on your doorstep not as a test, but as a sign. I knew then what I know now. You were the only one worthy to carry her legacy." Zuri took it with both hands and pressed it to her heart. News of her visit spread like wildfire, and with it came envy. Some villagers whispered, "She bewitched him with herbs." Others muttered, "She trapped him with beauty." One bold woman said, "She's just a lucky market girl. She doesn't belong among royals." Zuri didn't answer them with rage or tears. She answered them once, and once only. She stood in the village square, where she had once knelt with food in her hand, and said, "If feeding a hungry soul is witchcraft, then may every daughter be a witch." And the crowd went silent. No one laughed after that. Some even looked ashamed. Zuri returned to her life, not as a princess, but as something deeper. A woman who had fed the forgotten, stood with the fallen, and chose service over silver. The school was built near the hills, the clinic beside the river, and every day Zuri walked between them, no crown on her head, but the bracelet of a queen on her wrist, because some rewards are not made of gold, but of the lives they change. 1 year had passed since the day Prince Amari removed his disguise beneath the village acacia tree. The world around Zuri had changed, but her soul remained grounded in the same gentle purpose: to heal, to serve, to give. Now, she ran a wellness home nestled just beyond the palace gates, built exactly where she had requested. between the river and the hills. The home was not large, but it was full of laughter, warmth, herbal smoke, and soft songs sung by the orphans and elders she cared for. Children with bare feet played in the sand, while grandmothers with silver hair braided their locks and told stories passed down from forgotten queens. Elders once abandoned now received care, not just medicine. They were treated with dignity, with touch, with song. Zuri moved among them every day, her simple dress clean and her voice soft, humming the same lullaby that had once passed between her and a man in rags. The village had changed too. What was once shame became pride. The people who had laughed and gossiped now brought their own food donations to her doorstep. Some had etched her story into song. Others carved her image into wood. And when the first harvest moon rose that year, the village held a festival, one unlike any before. It was not to honor kings or crops, but a girl with no title. Beneath colorful lanterns strung from tree to tree, villagers sang and danced in celebration of the girl who fed the crown. Young girls wore beaded bracelets in her honor. Little boys reenacted the scene where the prince revealed himself. And in the center of it all stood Zuri, unsure of what to do with so many eyes on her. She smiled through the awkwardness, holding the hands of the elders who danced beside her. She didn't crave the spotlight, but she accepted their love, their songs, their gratitude. Prince Amari came too, sometimes with guards, sometimes alone. He never spoke long. He would stand at the edge of the wellness home, watch her speak with a child or kneel beside a tired old man. Then he'd leave quietly, nodding to her as their eyes met, never saying more than he had to. But once, he left something behind. A folded piece of parchment placed on the table beside the herbal oils. No seal, just her name written in ink. She opened it that night beneath the light of a clay lamp. My crown is heavy, but it rests easier when you smile. Amari Zuri read it twice, then again. She didn't reply, but she placed the note in the drawer beside her bed, the same drawer that held the bracelet. In the weeks that followed, his visits grew more frequent. He brought books for the children, herbs for the clinic, and sometimes just silence. He would sit near the river and watch the sunset with her without speaking a word. People began to whisper, but Zuri didn't care. She wasn't chasing a crown. She had already built a legacy, not with gold or status, but with a lunch shared beneath a tree and a heart that refused to turn away from need. And if that heart had softened a prince's burden, that too was its own quiet miracle. The morning sun spilled golden light across the village square. The same square where Zuri once knelt beside a man no one wanted to see. Now, every morning, she placed a lunch bowl on the same flat stone where he used to sit. A simple meal of maize, a few mango slices, and a touch of honey if she had it. She never watched to see who took it. That wasn't the point. Sometimes the bowl was gone before noon. Sometimes it sat untouched. But she left it anyway. Because somewhere, someone might need it. And perhaps, just like him, they didn't know how to ask. Zuri's voice returned softly in narration, carried by the wind and memory. They called him a beggar. They said he was mad, cursed, nothing. But I saw someone hungry, not just for food, but for grace. She walked slowly past the marketplace now, people greeting her with respect instead of scorn. Children wave, elders nod. Some simply look at her with quiet reverence. I didn't have much, just a lunch I could barely spare. But in that moment, it was enough. She passes the riverbank where she once found him sick, half-conscious, reaching for water. Now the path is clean, lined with flowers the children planted in his honor. He taught me that a true heart is not loud, that some kings hide in silence, not in palaces. Zuri pauses by the clinic and watches an orphan girl wrap herbs around an elder's hand. Her small fingers gentle, her smile steady. A year ago, neither of them had a place to belong. Now, they live in the home her kindness built. People say I changed his life, but they don't know. He changed mine first. Inside her room, Zuri opens the drawer beside her bed and touches two things: the bracelet that once belonged to a queen, and the note Amari wrote her, now creased at the corners but still held close. She smiles and walks outside. The wind dances softly, lifting her scarf as she returns to the square, where another lunch sits, waiting for another forgotten soul. And then, her final words rise like a quiet anthem. I didn't feed a beggar. I fed a soul. And when he took off his disguise, he showed me mine too, not just a girl with lunch, but a girl with a kingdom of kindness. Fade out, bird song. The bowl still waits, and so does the next story.